All right, sounds good. Well, good morning. And so I'm going to be talking about effectiveness monitoring of these habitat structures in the Nooksack. There's been a lot of restoration work that's gone on in our watershed, but I'm really just going to focus on these main stem habitat structures because that's been one of the key tools we've used for trying to recover our threatened spring Chinook stocks in the South Fork and in the North Fork. So I'll start with kind of where we've been historically, where we are now, and where we need to go in the future. And this is Chinook populations. The column on the left is based on a life cycle model of spring Chinook and historic habitat conditions. So historically, we think that the North Fork population had maybe 27,000 fish in it. The South Fork population was slightly smaller, 16,000 fish. And those numbers are actually fairly consistent with the catch records from the mouth of the river in the early historic period. The columns on the right, which you can barely see, are 2015 natural origin populations for the South Fork, 7 fish, and for the North Fork, 401 fish. That 7 fish is the lowest we've seen in the last decade or so. That population is generally around 50 fish or so. So 2015 was a particularly poor year for our spring Chinook returns. The middle column is where we need to get, and habitat restoration is going to be a big means of achieving these recovered populations. So one of the things we're looking at with habitat restoration is where should we be doing that work to get the most benefit for these populations. Since spring Chinook, are fish that tend to be in the main stems of the river and tend to move upstream, into the upper parts of the watershed, it makes sense that we would be getting the most response in the population from habitat restoration in the headwater area. So that means for the Nooksack, that's the South Fork, main stem, the North Fork, and the Middle Fork. And we really are going to need to be addressing the habitat limiting factors in those rivers in order to meet our recovery goals. So for the South Fork, our recovery plan has identified 3 main limiting factors. Jim touched on these previously. It's the lack of key habitat, and in the South Fork, that generally means nice deep pools with good cover. Low habitat diversity, so that would be kind of woody cover and edge types for juvenile rearing, and then high water temperature. In the North and Middle Fork, it's more about loss of fish during the incubation period. So it would be scour and then channels moving and then reds dewatering and things like that. So we have different project objectives in different parts of our watershed. And some of the monitoring methods that we use are they're tied to those habitat limiting factors and what the project objectives are. So things like improving pool frequency, depth of pools, and such. So when we do monitoring, we look at both kind of the broader strategy. So are engineered log jams forming pools? Are these projects effective at forming pools? And we look at more of a reach scale, so kind of comparing a treated reach to an untreated reach. And this is a sample of some work that was done in 2011 in the South Fork, looking at all of the projects, the engineered logjam projects that had been done in the river at that point. The dots are the number of structures, so approximately 80 something structures that were built in the South Fork, and then the columns are the number of pools and the types of pools, whether they're like channel spanning pools or smaller pools. You can see that there's a lot of difference between project reaches, and some of that has to do with when they were built, some of that has to do with the methods that were used in the design, and some of it had to do with the regulatory environment that was in place at the time of design and construction. Things like FEMA floodplain regulations limited the amount of wood that you could actually get out into the channel, and sometimes impacts from construction limited where you could build projects. So one thing that doesn't really tell us, though, is how these things change through time. And this is a look at the Hutchinson Creek project, that in 2000 there was an armored levee that was disconnecting Hutchinson Creek from the main stem South Fork. The project was to remove that levee and install a series of engineered log jams along the bank to provide sort of that edge of the channel, but then, better scour and cover. And the project was built in 2006. That's the black vertical line on the graph. And you can see, previously there was one pool that was a little over 2 meters deep. During construction, we removed the riprap, that pool went away, but immediately that pool was replaced by an engineered logjam pool that continued to deepen for, a couple of years. And then the other log jams, the blue polygons in the 2016 photo, also through time began to form pools. This is, I guess, following up on the fish use of these structures. So this is some Snorkel Survey from this summer, looking at the whole South Fork from about River Mile 5 up to River Mile 13. The black dots are the numbers of fish that were seen in the Snorkel surveys, and the squares are those that were seen in engineered logjams. So you see a strong preference for holding adult Chinook in these engineered logjams. The diamonds are natural accumulations of wood, so you definitely see that these fish are preferring to be holding in pools with wood cover, which is exactly what we're trying to create with these engineered logjams. So looking more at the reach scale, here's a sample of the Hutchinson reach, which is 3 projects that were built between 2006 at the earliest and I think 2012 as a treated reach, and then the downstream reach, which we call Fish Camp, as an untreated reach. And you can see in the untreated reach that between 2000 and 2016 there was some change just from natural channel migration, from interaction with wood that was recruited locally, things like that. There was an increase in secondary pools in that reach. But if you look at the treatment reach, the Hutchinson reach, you can see that there's a profound increase in primary pools, and that those pools in 2000 were formed by riprap, and by 2012 they were all formed by wood. So much better cover, and much more frequent pools, deep pools. Another aspect of habitat diversity is looking at the shallow margins of the channel. These are important rearing areas for juveniles, particularly in the winter, and the different types of edges, based on some work done in the Skagit, there's provide a different capacity, a different amount of area for these juveniles to use. And so as you get to more complex, edges, you can have more space for more fish. And so we've gone through and we've mapped, the length of these edges, and we have estimates of widths. And you can see again in the Fish Camp reach, there was a slight increase just from, natural change. But in the Hutchinson reach, there was another profound increase in the capacity for juvenile rearing. When we've gone out and snorkeled these and counted juveniles, you can see that there's, it's much more dense fish use of the Hutchinson reach, like 1.5 times the number of fish per meter in the Hutchinson reach compared to the Fish Camp reach. And those fish are generally associated with wood. So I'm just going to skip over temperature because I think Jim pretty well nailed that. So we'll just move on to the North Fork. The North Fork is much different. Again, here we're really focusing on side channel length, side channel persistence through time, and sort of the floodplain mosaic of different vegetation patches and ages across the floodplain, the complexity that Tim was talking about restoring with projects to get multiple channels, and how these can be better connected through groundwater and such. So this is a sample from the Wildcat project, which was built between 2009 and 2013. And you can see there is a pretty much immediate increase in side channel length. That side channel length has changed locations between 2013 and 2016 as the channel has moved and interacted with log jams across the entire floodplain. Some places the side channels will disappear, but then they'll be reformed in other locations. So that's what we've seen, as far as maintaining side channel length. How we tie that length to fish is by looking at observed red densities in different habitat types. So, the reds we count reds in side channels versus braids or the main stem. And then we have observed variable survival by habitat type. Reds tend to survive better in more sheltered side channel areas, which makes sense, rather than out in the main stem where the channel moves around a lot and you got to have a lot more energy. And then we look at the average fecundity of of the fish and the egg survival. And that can give you an idea of the survival to emergence of these eggs in these different environments. And you can really see the response of the survival in the project. So this is, again, the wildcat reach, and you can see between 2012 and 2013, a large increase in survival, and that's due to these secondary channels. And then the last piece we look at with side channels is really the connectivity through the spawning and incubation period. So we don't want to see fish spawning in areas that become dry during the winter low flow period. And when we map at the onset of spawning and then again during winter low flow, and we see that these channels do maintain connectivity. The last bit, I apologize for the green on green, but the last thing we're really looking at is that forest patch growth and persistence through time. So this is based on LiDAR subtractions of showing vegetation growth. So the green stippling are places that have grown more than 25 feet in the 8-year period between 2005 and 2013. So that's pretty rapid growth of these deciduous trees, but it shows that these are stable surfaces and that that they have been persisted through that 8-year period. And they're associated with the engineered log jams. And if you were to go out there, you would see that underneath these deciduous trees, you're starting to get a conifer component coming, and that these, if they're allowed to persist without being, disturbed by the channel, that you'll get these, forming those patchworks of mature forests across the floodplain, which is what we're trying to get. And when we look at these through time, this is our Lone Tree project. You can see that there's a lot of variability in variation in forested island area, and that's a response to different climate patterns through time. But what we're hoping to see is that these forested islands will reach sort of those historical kind of high levels of forest island area, and that those will persist through time instead of peaking and falling and peaking and falling. Because the forested islands, it's really the side channels that are associated with those forested islands that we're focused on. So we're starting to see that. The question is whether that's going to persist. So with that, I just wanted to thank, we're a small department and everyone really has pitched in on doing this work, but particularly Treva Co's been involved in a lot of the data collection and a lot of the study design and has been instrumental in doing this. Our partners with doing the fish survey work with Jim and Jeremy and Ian, and obviously it's project landowners giving us access and our funding agencies. So thank you all.